Hello once again, friends, neighbors, and fellow Christians, and welcome back to another lesson in this series where we are studying from the writings of Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 15 regarding the resurrection. And as we've been studying for some time now in this series of lessons designed to look at the Old Testament prophecies about the coming of the eternal, the everlasting, the Messianic kingdom, the new covenant that was foretold by all the Old Testament prophets, by Moses and the prophets, Samuel and as many as have spoken, as Peter says there in Acts chapter 3, likewise have foretold of these days. And these things is what we've been investigating and looking at the promises that God made to Old Covenant Israel. That's who he was speaking to and promising these things to. Jesus came to fulfill, he came to confirm the promises that were made to the fathers, Romans 15 and verse 8. And so as we are in our study here of 1 Corinthians chapter 15, the resurrection text, discourse, if you will, we have just looked at where Paul says that flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God. He says, I show you a mystery, we shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed. So again, study the context there and notice how that he includes himself in this statement, we shall not all sleep. So again, not all the Corinthians would die physically. Some would, but not all, before this change took place. But also notice that not all would sleep, but all would be changed. Okay, so not all of them would die physically, yet they would all undergo this same change. And in our verse then, in verse 52, in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trump, for the trumpet shall sound, and the dead shall be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed. Again, we'll not all sleep, but we shall all be changed. And so again, as Paul began this discourse here, he was addressing the argument, if you will, that the some at Corinth were denying resurrection of the dead ones. And again, we've established who that group of people is in previous lessons, that this is referring to the group of the dead ones who were in Hades, those who died prior to Pentecost, if you will, and the inauguration of the new Messianic covenant. And so Paul says here that in a moment, and this is an interesting word here that is translated as moment in the text here. This is the only place this word is used in the entirety of the Bible, and it is the word atomos, and I'm not going to try to pronounce that, atomos or whatever, however that is pronounced. But here's the interesting part. This is where we get our word atom, and of course we understand that an atom is the smallest unit, we'll use that word, of physical matter. It is the smallest unit. And so in the context that he's using it here, in a moment that is referring to a point in time, it would be such a small unit of time that it could not be divided. So that's how fast, if you will, that this would occur. And then of course he also uses in the twinkling of an eye, that we'll talk about a little bit here in a few minutes. But I want to notice just a couple of texts where something was stated that it was going to happen in a moment. And the first one is Exodus chapter 33. Now, I encourage you on your own time to read back up and read chapter 32, because this is where Moses goes up on the mountain, upon Mount Sinai, to receive the Ten Commandments. And so while he's there, we know the story of how the children of Israel became restless. They wanted gods to worship. They took off their earrings and what have you, the gold ornaments. They gave them to Aaron. He fashioned a golden calf, a molten calf, and they worshipped that thing. And so that's what is in the preceding chapter. And again, I want you to go back there and to read that and to look at that. And we'll notice a couple of things here just in passing from this chapter here, that as you read down, when you get down to verse 11, it says, "And the Lord spake unto Moses face to face, as a man speaks to his friend." Well, what's interesting here is this face-to-face meeting between Moses and Jehovah. Well, we find another meeting like this, another face-to-face meeting, and that is with Joshua when he crosses the Jordan into the Promised Land. And you come there in Joshua chapter 5, and you see that Joshua has a face-to-face meeting with the Lord. Now, again, what is so interesting about that is at the giving of the covenant, here in Exodus 33, there is this face-to-face meeting with God. When Joshua enters the Promised Land, the fulfillment of the promise of going into the Promised Land, there is another face-to-face meeting with God. Well, this is what Paul is anticipating in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, this face-to-face meeting. And it would be soon, as even Jesus would say there in the Olivet Discourse, when you see these things begin to come to pass, look up, lift up your heads, for your redemption draws nigh. The kingdom of heaven is nigh at hand. And so again, that's why I say that is so interesting when you read that. And again, read the chapter, back up, and look at chapter 32 of when these people sinned and how that some of the men were told to go in and out of the gates of the camps and to slay these people who had committed sin. And they killed them with the sword. And you notice in verse 28 that the children of Levi did according to the word of Moses, and there fell of the people that day about 3,000 men. Notice that. Notice that at the giving of the covenant, that in this time frame of the giving of the covenant, that there were about 3,000 men slain. And then compare that or contrast that with the day of Pentecost, and how at the inauguration of the new covenant, there were about 3,000 souls saved. Now, I just throw that out there, and that's really interesting. And then again, when we look at chapter 32 there, where it says, "Therefore now go, lead the people unto the place of which I have spoken unto thee. Behold, my angel shall go before thee. Nevertheless," now notice this, "nevertheless, in the day when I visit, I will visit their sin upon them." And then notice that Jesus would quote and apply the sentiment of this prophecy as recorded by Luke. And this is found in chapter 19 of Luke, where Jesus said, "If you had known, even you, especially in this your day, the things that make for your peace, but now they are hidden from your eyes. For the days will come upon you when your enemies will build an embankment around you, surround you, and close you in on every side, and level you, and your children within you to the ground. And they will not leave in you one stone upon another." Why? "Because you did not know the time of your visitation." Do you see that? And again, like I said in the last lesson, when we see these connections, when we see these parallels, you just can't unsee them. And again, the time period of this visitation would be when? When did Jesus say that would be? When your enemies, that'd be the Roman armies, when your enemies will cast a trench about thee, the King James Version, cast a trench about thee, surround you, and hem you in on every side, and not leave, and level you even to the ground, and not leave one stone upon another. Well, see, that's what Jesus said in the introduction to the Olivet Discourse. When he told them, you see these buildings here, there's coming a day when there will not be left one stone upon another that will not be thrown down. Same time period. This is when this visitation would be. And then you can go over to 1 Peter chapter 2 and notice that Peter says, but you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a peculiar people, that you should show forth the praises of him who hath called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. Notice, which in times past were not a people, but are now the people of God, quoting from Hosea 2, which had not obtained mercy, but now have obtained mercy. Dearly beloved, I beseech you, as strangers and pilgrims, abstain from fleshly lusts, which war against the soul, having your conversation honest among the Gentiles, that whereas they speak evil against you as evildoers, they may by your good works which they behold glorify God in the day of visitation. Now again, when did Jesus say that day of visitation would be? It would be in the time frame of when the Roman armies would cast a trench around them, and they did that. That's well documented in history. Josephus, for instance, and every stone of the temple was thrown down. This is what they were anticipating. This is the context that we find in Exodus chapter 32. And we come into chapter 33. When we look at chapter 33 then, we see, come down to verse 11, that, and we covered that verse. I was looking for the verse here. I should have highlighted it to make it easy to find. All right, so the Lord said to Moses, depart, go up hence, thou and the people which thou hast brought up out of the land of Egypt, unto a land which I swear unto Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob, saying, unto thy seed will I give it. And I will send an angel before thee, and I will drive out the Canaanite, the Amorite, the Hittite, the Perizzite, the Hivite, and the Jebusite, unto a land flowing with milk and honey. For I will not go up in the midst of thee, for thou art a stiff-necked people. Remember what Stephen said in Acts 7? You are stiff-necked and uncircumcised in heart and ears. Okay, lest I consume thee in the way. And when the people heard these evil tidings, they mourned, and no man did put on his garments. For the Lord had said unto Moses, say unto the children of Israel, you are a stiff-necked people, and I will come up in the midst of thee in a moment. There's the verse I was looking for. I will come up in the midst of thee in a moment, and consume thee. Therefore now put off thy ornaments from thee, that I may know what to do unto thee. So again, read chapter 32 and chapter 33. Read them over 2 or 3 times and see that. All right, another text I want us to look at with this idea of a moment, and that is Numbers chapter 16. Now again, I'm just going to read the one verse, verse 21. Separate yourselves from among this congregation, that I may consume them in a moment. All right, so again, I encourage you to take the time to read all of Numbers chapter 16, because this is where the about 250 men withstood Moses, and they wanted to participate in the temple sacrifices and so forth. They were not of the tribe of Levi, so they weren't qualified to do that. And this is where we read about Korah. You know, Jude talks about they are perished in the gainsaying of Korah. Well, this is where that is taken from. That is Numbers chapter 16. And just to loosely paraphrase this event here, as I said, these men wanted to usurp the authority to participate in sacrifice, burning incense, and so forth in the tabernacle service. And you know, Moses said, "Why, you bunch of hypocrites? You're not." He didn't do that. He said, "All right, now you just separate yourselves. You stand right over here, so to speak, and I'll speak to God about this." And Moses said, "Now, if y'all live to die a natural death, which means if you live to an old age and die a natural death. If y'all live to die a natural death, then God has not sent me. But if the Lord perform a new thing, and the earth open up and swallow you, then that'll be a sign that you've provoked the Lord. And immediately when he said that, the earth opened up, fire came out and consumed them. Fire came from the Lord and consumed them, and the earth swallowed them up. So, again, the idea of a moment, being consumed in a moment, I wanted to throw a couple of texts in there for you to look at and to study. And also in number 16 to notice how that when God has specified the order of things, then man does not have the right to improvise. He does not have the right to change what God has authorized. And you see, we can learn that principle. We can apply that principle in our lives in the new covenant. When God has specified, sing and make melody in your heart to the Lord, man doesn't have the right to change that and to add to that, to improvise and to add mechanical instruments of music. And that's just an example. We can use this principle with baptism. Baptism, the very definition of the word is to immerse in a liquid. It actually came from the word that meant was used in describing how to dye a garment. You put the dye in the water and you immerse the garment in the dye. That's bapto. That's where the word, the original meaning of the word. And we see the examples in Acts chapter 8 of the eunuch, Philip and the eunuch. They stopped the chariot. They went down into the water. Philip baptized him. They came up out of the water. And so we have these examples. They are specific. Man does not have the right to improvise. He does not have the right to change. He can't change that into sprinkling some water on a person or pouring some water on a person or baptizing, quote unquote, a little infant, or even to say, well, baptism is no longer necessary. We don't have the right to change those things. And number 16 is an exclamation point on that fact. And when God says something, then we got to follow that. And that's how we are pleasing in the sight of God. All right, so, as we go on then, looking at, in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, I get back over here to our verse. Verse 52. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye. And again, you can see the word right here, R-H-I-P-E. That's the Greek word that is translated twinkling. And again, this is the only place that this word is used. And Robertson tells us that this word was used by the Greeks for the flapping of a wing, the buzz of a gnat, the quivering of a harp, and the twinkling of a star. So it was something that was, it was repetitive, but it was repeated very quickly. If you think about the buzz of the wing of a gnat, that's pretty fast. Or if you think about the blink of an eye, that's really fast, less than a second. And so, again, with the idea of in a moment, an atom, a division of time that can't be reduced, in the twinkling of an eye, then he says, at the last trump, for the trumpet shall sound. Now, this is what we find in the Olivet Discourse in Matthew 24, verses 30 and 31. Then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. Then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn, and they, all the tribes of the earth, they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. Again, Daniel 7:13. And he shall send his angels, notice, with a great sound of a trumpet. They shall gather together his elect from the four winds. All right. So here is this great trumpet. And Jesus is alluding to Isaiah 27 and verse 13, which says, and you know, I'm not making this up. There are even futurist scholars who admit and see this point that Jesus is alluding to Isaiah 27:13. It shall come to pass in that day that the great trumpet shall be blown, and they shall come which were ready to perish in the land of Assyria, and the outcasts in the land of Egypt, and they shall worship the Lord in the holy mount at Jerusalem. Now again, notice that he says that it'll come to pass in that day. Well, in what day? Well, when you back up just a few verses, you see this. By this, therefore, shall the iniquity of Jacob be purged, and this is all the fruit to take away his sin, when he makes all the stones of the altar as chalk stones that are beaten in sunder, the groves and the images shall not stand up, yet the defenced city shall be desolate. Do you see that? In that day, when the great trumpet would be blown, would be in the day of the destruction of the temple, the Jewish temple, which, again, you read the same thing back in chapter 25, where he says that it will not be rebuilt. Chapter 25, verse 2. And Isaiah 24 through about 28 or 29, the little apocalypse, it recapitulates this same thing over and over again, just like the book of Revelation recapitulates the same events in different terminology. And that's what we see right here. This would occur at the destruction of the altar, when it would be beaten into dust, and the city would be left desolate. What Jesus say at the close of Matthew 23, behold, your house is left unto you desolate. And that's exactly what Isaiah says right here. The defenced city shall be desolate, the habitation forsaken and left like a wilderness. There shall the calf feed, and there shall he lie down and consume the branches thereof. When the boughs thereof are withered, they shall be broken off. The women come and set them on fire, for it is a people of no understanding. Therefore he that made them will not have mercy on them, and he that formed them will show them no favor. Now notice, and it shall come to pass in that day. It would be the day that the great trumpet will be blown. The next verse. It would be in the day that the altar is beaten in the dust. It would be the day that the temple or the city is left desolate. It shall come to pass in that day that the Lord shall beat off from the channel of the river unto the stream of Egypt, and you shall be gathered one by one, O ye children of Israel. And the great trumpet will be blown. Is there any reason why that people can see that Jesus was citing Isaiah 27 in the Olivet Discourse in Matthew 24? That he'll send his angels with the great sound of a trumpet. They'll gather together his elect from the four winds. Again, once you see these parallels and these connections, you can't unsee them. All right, again, in Exodus chapter 19. And it came to pass on the third day in the morning that there were thunders and lightnings and a thick cloud upon the mount. Notice, and the voice of the trumpet exceeding loud, so that all the people that was in the camp trembled. All right, this is when Moses went up on the mountain to receive the Ten Commandments. All right, again in chapter 20, verse 18. Again, take the time to read all of these chapters. I'm just hitting a couple of highlights to show you these connections. And all the people saw the thunderings and the lightnings and the noise of the trumpet and the mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they removed and stood afar off. This is what Paul is talking about in Hebrews chapter 12. When he says, you are not come to the mount that might be touched and that burn with fire, nor unto blackness and darkness and tempest, and the sound of a trumpet, and the voice of words, which voice they that heard entreated that the word should not be spoken to them anymore. Again, look at these connections, folks, and look at how this trumpet, the sound of the trumpet, the voice of the trumpet, is used in connection with the giving of the covenants. All right, so again, Paul says here that at the last trump, the trumpet shall sound, the dead shall be raised incorruptible. Well, folks, again, realizing that Paul taught the same thing everywhere in every church. 1 Corinthians 4 and verse 17. He wrote to the Thessalonians and said, "For this we say unto you by the word of the Lord, that we which are alive and remain unto the parousia of the Lord," the coming of the Lord, "shall not precede them which are asleep. For the Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of," now notice, "with the voice of the archangel, and with the trump of God, and the dead in Christ shall rise first." Well, that's what he says right here in our text. At the last trumpet, the trumpet will sound, the dead shall be raised incorruptible. When he wrote to the Thessalonians, he tied this directly, specifically to the parousia of the Lord. Well, Paul is talking about the parousia of the Lord in our text back in verse 23 that we've talked about several times now. So again, they're parallel. All right, so this voice and this trumpet, notice what we find in the words of Jesus back in John chapter 5, where he said, "Verily, verily, I say unto you, he that hears my word and believes on him that sent me has, not shall have, he has everlasting life, and shall not come into condemnation, but," now notice the present tense language here again, "but is passed from death into life." King James Version says unto. The New King James says into. It's ice there. Into life. They have. He says he is, present tense, passed from death into life. Folks, that's the definition of resurrection. "Verily, verily, I say unto you, the hour is coming, and now is." When? Now. That's Jesus' now. That's not my now. That's not our grandchildren's now. That's Jesus' now. "The hour is coming, and now is, when the dead shall hear the voice." When the dead shall hear the voice of the Son of God, and they that hear shall live. And then he says in verse 28, "Marvel not at this, for the hour is coming, into which all that are in the graves," insert Ezekiel 37, please, "all that are in the graves shall hear his voice, and shall come forth, they that have done good unto the resurrection of life, and they that have done evil unto the resurrection of damnation." So again, here we have an instance where Jesus is referring to a resurrection of both the just and the unjust. Jesus is applying Daniel chapter 12, which is the only prophecy of a resurrection of both the just and the unjust. And Jesus is applying that it has already begun. "The hour is coming, and now is," he says. He is passed from death into life, and the hour is coming that all that are in the graves shall hear his voice. So again, I don't think there's anybody that would argue the point that this is parallel, the resurrection Jesus is speaking of here, that it is parallel with 1 Thessalonians 4 and 1 Corinthians chapter 15. And I've even asked people in debate that question, and they will agree. These passages are parallel. So if they're and they are, if they are parallel, since they are parallel, then folks, we have to observe the timing. That's how simple this is. All right, now, when we look back at Matthew 13, then this is where Jesus was explaining the parable of the wheat and the tares, and he said that the field is the world, that's the cosmos, the good seed are the children of the kingdom, but the tares are the children of the wicked one. The enemy that sowed them is the devil. The harvest, notice that, the harvest is the end of the world, King James Version, this age, the aeon. Aeon, the end of the age. And the reapers are the angels. As therefore the tares are gathered and burned in the fire, so shall it be in the end of this age. Not that age. Not whatever generation happens to be alive at this assumed end of time. That's not what Jesus said. He said, so shall it be at the end of this age. and they were in the end of the age. Paul says so in 1 Corinthians chapter 10. He said, upon whom the ends of the earth, or the ends of the age, have come. And in Hebrews 9, he said that Jesus appeared in the end of the age. Hebrews 9:26. Well, if Jesus appeared in the end of the age, and he did, and Jesus says here the harvest is the end of this age, then folks, there's no way to make this mean something yet in our future. If language means anything, and it does, then you simply just can't get around these facts, these exegetical, contextual facts. And again, I'm not interpreting anything. I am reading the text. I'm allowing the texts to speak for themselves. Jesus said it would be in the end of this age. Paul said Jesus appeared in the end of the age. Hebrews 9:26. Therefore, this age, in verse 40 here, would be the Mosaic age, the end of the Jewish age. All right, so, again, thinking about the harvest and the gathering and the blowing of the trumpet, this is the fulfillment, and would be the fulfillment in their immediate future, of Joel 3, verses 13 through 17. Now again, back up, refresh your memory. Read all of chapter 2 and all of chapter 3. And remember that chapter 2 begins with this unparalleled time of tribulation, that it would be the day of the Lord. And there could only be one unparalleled time of tribulation. We're going to talk a little bit more about the tribulation here as we get on down a little bit further. There could only be one that is unparalleled. That would be called the day of the Lord. Peter referred to it, quoting from the end of chapter 2 of Joel, there in Acts chapter 2. This is that was spoken by the prophet Joel. And so that was the beginning of the fulfillment of the prophecy. And as you go on down into chapter 3, then we'll look, when we look a little bit further here, we'll see the fulfillment of this. But notice, put you in the sickle, for the harvest is ripe. Come, get you down, for the press is full, the fats overflow, for their wickedness is great. Multitudes, multitudes in the valley of decision, for the day of the Lord is near in the valley of decision. The sun and the moon shall be darkened, and the stars shall withdraw their shining. Jesus quotes this prophecy in Matthew 24, verse 29. We just read verses 30 and 31. He conflates the prophecy of Joel with the prophecy of Daniel, with the prophecy of Isaiah in the Olivet Discourse, and others, but these at least that we've looked at. The sun and the moon shall be darkened, the stars shall withdraw their shining. The Lord also shall roar out of Zion, and his voice from Jerusalem. And the heavens and the earth shall shake, Hebrews 12. But the Lord will be the hope of his people and the strength of his children. So shall you know that I am the Lord your God, dwelling in Zion, my holy mountain. All right, so again, thinking about this harvest language, recall that in Revelation chapter 8, 7 angels were given 7 trumpets. They began to sound their trumpets. The first one sounded his trumpet, things happened. All right, and the second, and so on. And so when we look then at Revelation 11, verse 15, and the 7th angel sounded, and there were great voices in heaven. Notice that. There were great voices in heaven saying, the kingdoms of this world are, not shall be, not have been. The kingdoms of this world are become the kingdoms of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever. Folks, that is the fulfillment of Daniel chapter 7, verse 22, for instance. Until the Ancient of Days came, the judgment was given to the saints of the Most High. The time came that the saints possessed the kingdom. When would that be? when the seventh angel sounded his trumpet. At the last trump, the seventh angel was the last one. There were only 7 trumpets given. So this was at the last trumpet. Well, that's what Paul says in our text here, that the trumpet will sound, the last trump, and the dead shall be raised incorruptible. Now notice as we go on, in Revelation 14, and I saw another angel fly in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach to them that dwell on the earth, to every nation, kindred, tongue, and people, saying with a loud voice, Fear God, and give glory to him. Why? For the hour of his judgment is come. Notice that. Worship him that made heaven and earth, the sea, and the fountains and waters. And there followed another angel saying, Babylon is fallen. Notice that, please. When does this happen? When does Babylon fall? At the time of the 7th trump. Well, Babylon falling is Jerusalem falling. And I know a lot of people, they kick against that. But folks, again, when we allow the Bible to interpret itself, when you read Revelation 18, verse 24, all the righteous blood shed on the earth would come upon Babylon, the harlot. Jesus said in Matthew 23, 34 and following, that all the righteous blood shed on the earth would come upon Jerusalem. Now again, folks, once you see these connections, you can't unsee them. You have to just turn a blind eye to what these texts say. Again, I'm not interpreting anything. That's what the texts say. You cannot have all the righteous blood shed on the earth found in 2 different entities. John said it was Babylon the harlot. Jesus said it was Jerusalem. All right, now, saying with a loud voice, Fear God, give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment has come. Worship him that made heaven, earth, the sea, and the fountains of waters. And there followed another angel saying, Babylon is fallen, that great city, because she made all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. But now let's keep reading. Verse 13. Again, take the time to read the whole chapter. Verse 13, And I heard a voice from heaven saying unto me, Write, Blessed are the dead which die in the Lord from now on. Notice that. That completely rules out the idea that this is end of time language. Because you wouldn't have people dying in the Lord from now on if that's the end of time. Blessed are the dead which die in the Lord from now on, from henceforth, King James Version. Yea, saith the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors, and their works do follow them. Now notice this, please. And I looked, and behold, a white cloud. And upon the cloud one sat like unto the Son of Man. Do you see that? Here we have the Son of Man coming on the cloud. That is the Olivet Discourse, folks. That's Matthew 24:30. And that's, I forget the verse in Luke, but it's along about verse 30. And Luke even says that he would come on a cloud. That's Daniel 7:13, folks, because there's only one prophecy of the coming of the Son of Man with his angels for the judgment, and we just seen right here at the time of judgment's come, for the opening of the book of judgment, and that is Daniel 7. And this is the application, this is the fulfillment of Daniel 7 and Jesus' words applying Daniel 7 in the Olivet Discourse. All right, now, I looked, and behold, a white cloud, one sat on the cloud like unto the Son of Man, having on his head a golden crown, and in his hand a sharp sickle. And another angel came out of the temple, crying with a loud voice to him that sat on the cloud, Thrust in thy sickle and reap. Why? For the time is come for thee to reap, for the harvest of the earth is ripe. And he that sat on the cloud thrust in his sickle on the earth, and the earth was reaped. When will this happen? At the last trump. But now here's the kicker. When you back up and you look at the beginning of chapter 14, that is the 144,000. Taken from all the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. They are called first fruits back in chapter 7. The same group, they're called the first fruits. What have we learned in our study? In these last lessons, that first fruits is harvest language. We have learned that the first converts, Stephanus, Epaenetus, Crispus and Gaius, James writing to the Jewish Christians scattered of the 12 tribes scattered abroad, that they were a kind of first fruits. Do you see that? These Jewish converts, this 144,000 was Jewish converts out of Judaism into the New Covenant. Do you see that? That's first century, folks. There is absolutely no way around the fact that that is first century, because they were first fruits. And because they were first fruits, and because that was unquestionably first century, when you look in chapter 14, it says, "These are they who came out of the great tribulation." Do you see that? Those first fruits, Jewish converts out of Judaism into Christianity in the first century, were first fruits, and they came out of the Great Tribulation. Then the Great Tribulation cannot be something in our future. And thus dispensationalism implodes right there. Jesus said, quoting from Daniel 12, the Great Tribulation, that it would occur in his generation. This generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled. Again, folks, once you see these parallels and these connections, you can't unsee them without just turning a blind eye to God's Word. All right, again, notice in Psalms 81 and verse 3, again, take the time to read the whole psalm. But verse 3 says, "Blow up the trumpet in the new moon, in the time appointed on our solemn feast day." Well, again, the new moon feast was something that was inherently law of Moses, right? I don't think anybody would question the statement that there's really nothing more inherently law of Moses than their festal calendar, their Jewish feasts. Well, here we have Psalms, David saying to blow the trumpet in the new moon. Well, see, what's interesting about that is, when we come to Colossians chapter 2, verse 16, Paul said, "Let no man therefore judge you in meat or in drink or in respect of a holy day or of the new moon or of the Sabbath, which are," not were, which he'd had to have said were if it was nailed to the cross, "which are a shadow of things about to come." That's folks, that's mellow in the present tense right there. Things about to come. Paul says the same thing in Hebrews chapter 10. "For the law, having," present tense, not had, present tense, "the law having a shadow of good things about to come," again, that's mellow in the present tense. Having is present tense. Good things to come is present tense. About to come. And that fits perfectly with what he says at the end of the chapter, where he uses hoson, hoson, mikron. "He that shall come will come in a very, very little while." Hoson, hoson, mikron. Mikron's where we get our word micron. That's really small, isn't it? That's almost like atom in our text. It's so small. But he who would come, Paul says, he who shall come will come and will not tarry. And that would be in a very, very little while. And see, he had already mentioned the second coming back at the end of the previous chapter there in chapter 9, verse 28. So again, look at and read Leviticus chapter 23. And there it is. But take time. I don't have time to read all this, but take the time to read chapter 23, and you will see these feasts, that how Jehovah outlined them, how they're to be followed, and the timing when they're to be practiced. And you can see that there. And again, notice that you see the new moon feast included along with the Sabbaths in 1 Chronicles 23 and verse 31. In 2 Chronicles 2 and verse 4, you see again the new moon's mentioned there. And in 2 Chronicles 31 and verse 3, again, you see there that these Sabbaths and these things, again, were inherently law of Moses. And they were to follow these things. And God told them exactly when and how to observe these feasts. And again, this is a whole venue that I need to do a lot study in, because I've not studied that very much. That's why I'm not going to say much about it, because I don't want to say something wrong. But what I do know is the Feast of the New Moon and these Jewish feasts were inherently law of Moses. Paul said those things are, present tense, are a shadow of good things about to come. There in Colossians chapter 2 and verse 16. And so, as we look then at these texts, then we see that Paul wrote to the Thessalonians, and he said there that we who are alive and remain unto the parousia of the Lord. We see that he wrote in 1 Corinthians chapter 15 about the parousia of the Lord, and said, we shall not all sleep. We see that Jesus said in Matthew 24 verse 34, this generation shall not pass away till all be fulfilled. And again in Matthew 16, 27, 28 and the parallels, same thing. There's some standing here that will not taste of death till they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. Matthew 13, we see that the harvest would be in this age. Jesus said it would be in this generation. And we see, as we have noticed from the passages here in Revelation chapter 14 in particular, that this fulfills these prophecies of Joel 3, of Matthew 13, of the harvest, and how that this will be fulfilled in the time of the last trumpet being blown. And that is our text. That is what Paul says, that we will not all sleep, but we'll all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trump. So again, I'm going to end the study here, but I want you to go back over this video and look up these passages. Take your time. Sit down with a cup of coffee. Take your time and read carefully these passages. And notice these parallels. Notice these connections, folks. Because, again, once we see these connections, then it's not hard to understand that the Bible nowhere mentions the end of time. All right? It's not in there. And again, as I've shown in previous lessons, the exact opposite is actually stated in Moses and the prophets. And so we live in the blessings of all things fulfilled. That God kept his word to he was faithful to his promises made to Old Covenant Israel. And that it is impossible for God to lie. I mean, what a huge pillar that is for faith. That it's impossible for God to lie. If he said that I do this, this, and this, and I'll be saved, then that's what I put my faith in. He said to hear the gospel, to repent of sin, to be baptized into Christ for the remission of sins. That's what he said. And that's why that I can put faith in what he said. I don't have to redefine the terminology. I don't have to reconstruct the passages and say, well, now that's just, Peter was just talking to the Jews only there, and things like that. And we've debunked that as well in previous lessons. God said it. That's why I put my faith in it. And I don't put my faith in things that God did not say. Okay? All right, so we're going to conclude our lesson here. And I thank you so much for your time in studying with us each Lord's Day. And I pray that God will bless you richly in your study of His Word. Study these things, pray about it, meditate on these scriptures, folks, and let the Lord and His Word do you some good. So until our next lesson, thank you so much for your time, and may God bless you richly in your study.